students, our kids, 6th through senior high, to different places, literally around the world, as they walk through their student ministry experience. And it's because we have great leaders and because you guys are giving of your resources to allow this to happen. So way to go. And the reason we do this, missions are they're catalyzers in spiritual growth. When we look at how we get from one place to another, getting out of our own normal culture and getting into something different, something unique, just opens our heart to hear God in different ways. And that's why we do it very intentionally with our kids at least once a year. So really cool. Way to go. Thanks, you guys, for sharing today. We have something really special that we get to do today. We get to hear from Vince Vaughn. Vince has been a pastor at the Quarry for a long time. He stepped down and is now doing stuff outside of the Quarry. Still here, still part of us, still an Access Group leader, still loved, and we're excited to hear from him. So everybody, this is Vince Vaughn. Why don't you give him a round of applause?
Well, some of you that know me know that I'm not what you might call handy. I'm not great at fixing things. I don't have a passion for fixing things, but I do have a passion for knowing other people that enjoy fixing things. So that's usually my strategy, is to find somebody else. And a good example of that is last winter. So before the first big snow, I knew I had to get my snowblower fixed because at the end of the previous winter, it wouldn't start. So I'm like, okay, I'm at least going to look at this before it starts snowing, which is a big step forward for me. So I knew who I wanted to call, and that was my buddy Andy Armbruster. Some of you know because he goes to the Quarry, and Andy is handy. Handy Andy, I call him now. So he came over, he goes, okay, let's get it out. And one of the best things about this snowblower is that, I don't know, maybe they all do this, I don't really know, but it has an electric starter. So all you have to do is plug it in and then just push a button and it starts, which is fantastic, unless it doesn't start, which was the case here. It wasn't working when I did that. So Andy comes over and he's like, okay, let's pull it out. He says, why don't you plug it in? I just want to hear what's going on. So I'm like, okay. So I get the extension cord. I plug it into the snowblower. I turn around, and I'm walking towards the outlet in the garage. So I'm walking towards it, and as I do, I hear, vroom, and it's the snowblower running. And I'm looking at the cord, and I'm thinking, that's impossible. It can't be running because I haven't plugged in the cord yet. And I turn around, and Andy is just like smiling, and he's like, first pull, And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I was totally excited and also just felt like an idiot because not only had I not started it, I forgot that you could start it that way, that it even had one of these pulley things on it. I hadn't even attempted to do that. And he's like, really? But I was just excited that it was running. So I don't like doing that kind of stuff because I don't feel very confident at doing that sort of stuff. I'm not good at it, so I just try to do as little of it as I can. Now, I think that a lot of us feel the same way when it comes to sharing our faith. Sharing with others about Jesus and what he's meant to our life in hopes that they would want to know him as well. A lot of us don't feel very confident at it, if we're honest. We don't feel good at it, and so we don't do it very much. Or we hope somebody else will do it. Maybe the experts, the people that are really gifted at that, maybe they'll do it, and I don't have to feel so guilty about it. Because if you're like me in the past, I felt guilty because I hear pastors encouraging me to do it, and I'm like, I don't know how to do it. I don't feel good at it, so I just don't do it. All right? But a number of years ago, what really started helping me was looking at the life of Jesus and what he did, how he interacted with people who didn't know him, who weren't that religious. I started looking at his life and the life of other people I knew that seemed to be more effective at this, And as I started understanding more about the way that Jesus did this, I started to feel more encouraged. In fact, after time, I started feeling this way. I started thinking to myself, I could do that. Like, if that's what it looks like, I think I could do that. And really, that's my main hope this morning, is that you could walk away feeling like, I could do that. If that's what we're talking about, yeah, I don't have to be an expert. Who I am, the way God made me, I could do that. So what we're going to do here this morning is look at a couple of patterns in Jesus' life. A couple of just ways he operated over and over in relating to people who weren't all that religious, and learn from him and hopefully gain some confidence in this area, because obviously it's a very important area. I mean, we want people to know Jesus. And selfishly speaking, when you help somebody come to know him or become closer to him, it's one of the most amazing things you can experience. It really is awesome. So there's a lot of things that can motivate us in this area. All right, so to help us, we're going to look at a parable, a story that Jesus teaches around all of this stuff. And so we're going to start in Luke 15, verse 1. And again, we're going to look at a couple of patterns in Jesus' life. So before we get into the story, we're going to look at the context, kind of what was going on to set the scene of why Jesus even tells this story to begin with. All right, so this is Luke 15, verse 1, if you want to follow along. And we're just going to start with that first verse. It says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus." So we're just going to pause right there. The tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus. Now, tax collectors and sinners was kind of shorthand in that day and age for irreligious people. So basically, people that didn't go to the synagogue too much, you know? It'd be like today, like, yeah, they don't really go to church much. They're not really into that sort of thing. That's what they're talking about here, okay? And it says these tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. Now, anytime I've read that or read something similar in other places, I've always thought to myself, why? Why are these people gathering around Jesus? Why are they drawn to him? These irreligious people. Well, I think the very next verse gives us a clue. Verse 2. It says, "But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" Right? These Pharisees and the teachers of the law are the exact opposite. They are the highly religious of the day. Like, they're completely devoted. They follow all the laws and all of that. And they're really confused. And they're muttering to each other and saying, what's the deal with this guy? He doesn't avoid these sinners like we do. He doesn't just teach the sinners. He welcomes the sinners and eats with them, like hangs out with them. It's almost like he likes them or something. And that's exactly the case. That Jesus likes the lost. And that's the first and very important pattern we see in Jesus' life. It's very simple, but extremely significant. That Jesus likes the irreligious people around him. He enjoys them. He welcomes them into his life. Not just because he has to or some kind of project. He likes them. A good example of this is another tax collector that he calls to follow him named Levi. Right? And Levi not only says, yes, I want to become one of your disciples, he's so excited about it that he throws a party and invites all his tax collector buddies to meet Jesus. Now, how comfortable does he have to be with Jesus, and how welcoming did Jesus have to be to him for him to invite all of his friends, wanting them to meet Jesus? Right? You start getting clues of how Jesus interacted with people like Levi. Now today, I think it's interesting because I think Christians, you see different responses for different Christians to non-Christians or irreligious people, right? So there's kind of a spectrum, I think. And so on one end, you've got people that you might say sort of avoid non-Christians. I mean, yeah, they rub shoulders with them at work and that sort of thing, but what I mean is like actually having relationship and friendship with people that are not believers. So they tend to be kind of isolated in their life. They have Christian friends, they go to church, their family, their kids have Christian friends, but that's about it. And sometimes there's even a little bit of fear involved in terms of developing relationships with non-Christians, and so they tend to be a little bit isolated. Now, here in the middle, you have people that we might say Christians that are sort of politely tolerate non-Christians. Meaning, like if they have neighbors, I mean, they're polite to them, they're going to say hello to them, meet them, that sort of thing. But that's about as far as it's going to go relationally. They're not going to pursue relationship or friendship with them. And then finally, you have other Christians who, like Jesus, welcome people into their lives. They intentionally pursue relationship and friendship with non-Christians, right? So you have a whole spectrum here. So the interesting question is, again, why? Why are there these different responses and perspectives on how we relate to non-believers in our life? Well, let me give you an example that may start to flesh this out a little bit, or maybe answer that question. So my wife, Jackie, is a photographer, and until a few years ago, she focused on weddings. That's about all she did. And so she came home after one of these weddings and said, I just did a wedding for a neat couple, super neat couple, and I think we should go do something with them sometime. Well, I'm a pretty outgoing guy, but I'm like, I don't even know these people. I've never even met them. You know, they're clients of yours. Like, feels weird to me. And she's like, just trust me, you know. And if you know Jackie, she's pretty persuasive. So, of course, we went out, and of course, she was right. We had a great time. They were a lot of fun. They were a really neat couple. And so over the last 5 years, we've gotten to be really good friends with them. Now, the thing about it is that Greg and Sherry are not only not Christians, they're actually pretty cynical about it. When the topic comes up, they're kind of cynical about it. And of course, you know, we're always thinking like, you know we believe that. That's kind of what we are, right? And they somehow kind of put us in some other category. But like, you know, recently, Greg, he's pretty outspoken. He just kind of says what's on his mind. And he's like, oh, yeah, the Bible and all that. That was just a bunch of old white guys that got together and decided what was going to be in the Bible, you know. I'm thinking like, no, it's not, you know. And at some point, I'm going to talk to him about it. But, you know, they don't have kids, so they've kind of adopted our teenage kids as they're sort of like an aunt and uncle figure, and they love to play games and tease the kids and all that kind of stuff. But they have different views on things like, let's say, physical intimacy, you know, amongst teenagers or young adults or whatever. So after we hang out as a family with them, we'll talk to the kids and go, now, you know we have a little bit different perspective than those guys. They're like, yeah, we know, or whatever. But there's differences. I mean, there's real differences in beliefs and in some values, perspectives on things. So here's the thing. So what are we going to do with all of that? If we were sort of in the avoiding or tolerate camp, what would happen is we probably at best would be acquaintances with them. Probably actually wouldn't really see them much at all. Because here's what I think happens, or at least has happened for me in the past. I used to think that the most important thing to God was those beliefs and values and the differences between us and them. And if there's a difference, a gap there, then I should probably politely avoid those people. Like not invest in a relationship because the differences are too big. Right? The gap is too big. But what I started to see in Jesus was something different. That he didn't seem to focus on the gap, he focused on something else. The person. The most important thing to him was that person. I mean, can you imagine the differences between Jesus and these tax collectors and sinners? I mean, the beliefs and values and lifestyle. And yet, Jesus just bridges all of that and goes right to the person and says, I want to hang out with you. You're important to me. I value you. And that's the perspective we have to have if we're going to be like Jesus and actively welcome people into our lives who may be very different from us. The focus has to start being on them and God's love for them as people. And besides, like, why would I expect something different from Greg and Sherry? If they don't follow Christ, why would they have the same beliefs? You know? If I'm going to wait for them to change before we have a relationship, I could be waiting my entire life. Right? So this is the first pattern, and it is significant. Without following Jesus' lead on this, not much else is going to happen because there's no relationship there. Right? So we have to commit to start saying, man, I'm going to welcome people into my life relationally that might be pretty different from me. All right, so the second pattern, we're going to look at the parable itself. We haven't even got to the story yet to see the second pattern in Jesus' life. So again, he's talking to these Pharisees now, right, these pious religious people, and he said, let me tell you a story or two. So he actually tells a series of 3, and we're going to look at the second one, the second parable, starting in verse 8. So he says, suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin. In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. All right, so Jesus says, here's the deal. There's a woman, and she's got 10 coins, and she loses one of them. Now, one of these coins would have been a drachma, which was equal to about a day's wages. So today, even conservatively speaking, this would be the equivalent of losing a $100 bill. All right? So let's just say you're at your house, you realize you've lost a $100 bill. What do? Well, I mean, I know most of you are so loaded it wouldn't even matter to you, right? No big deal. But in our house, what would happen is if this was me, I'd be like, hey, everybody stop what you're doing and get down here. We got to find this $100 bill. You know, couch cushions would be flying. And I mean, nobody would be going anywhere till we found the $100 bill, right? It wouldn't be this casual thing like, oh, let's get to it later or whatever. We would be focused on finding that $100 bill. And Jesus says, that's how I feel about people that have been lost to me and to the Father. See, people who rightfully belong to us because we created them and long for relationship, long for them to come home to us. And what Jesus is trying to communicate here to these Pharisees is that this is not a casual thing for him. That when he goes throughout his life, his day, this isn't just somewhere in the back of his mind. He is always looking for the lost. He's always looking. And in particular, what he's looking for are people that are open to and longing to come home to him and to the Father. He's just like scanning the horizon every single day, all the time. A great example of this is when he and his followers one day are passing through Jericho on their way to Jerusalem. So they're not headed to Jericho, they're just passing through. And as they pass through, he sees this guy, this grown man, actually a wealthy businessman, in a tree, up in a tree. Everybody else is just going to go right on by this guy. And Jesus says, time out. We got to stop. And he's like, dude, what are you doing up in a tree, you know? You've got to come down here. I've got to hear your story. And, of course, that was Zacchaeus. And we find out that he was curious. He wanted to know about this Jesus. And Jesus goes to his house that day, And Zacchaeus' life does a 180. I mean, dramatic change in his life. And Jesus spotted Zacchaeus because he was looking. A whole crowd of people weren't looking at all. Totally missed it. But not Jesus. Right? And Jesus is calling us to do the same thing, to have this on the very front of our minds, to kind of be like missionaries, like we just watched on the video where, I mean, they weren't just accidentally, these students going out there, they were very intentional about what they were doing. And that's how Jesus was all the time. But what does this look like in our lives? Because I think this is where we start to feel like, oh, I don't know how this works, and I'm very busy, and how would I add this to my life? What does this look like? Where do we look? Right? And again, Jesus is our model, because what he does is he does this right in the midst of his everyday life. He doesn't go there for this specific person. It's as he's passing through. And that's the clue, right? So for us, it has to be in the midst of our everyday life. All right, for example, how many of you have kids that are involved in activities? So sports, music, poker, whatever, you know. All right, I'm just checking in, make sure you're still paying attention here. So how many of you live in a neighborhood? Like 3 people? Okay, good. How many of you work? All right, that's good. If you don't do any of those, you might need to get out a little bit more. So we're all around people all the time, all right? So we're going to be there one way or another. So as an example, my son Tucker, he's 16 now. He's played soccer for years. So we've gone to many, many soccer games. Last summer, he joined a new team. So that meant a whole new set of parents to meet, different from the ones we had sat at games with for years, right? So we come to the first game, and I thought, you know what? Here's a couple of options. Option A is we can unfold our chairs, set them down on the sideline, watch the game, fold our chairs back up, and leave. We can be good soccer parents. Or we can go to the game and intentionally be thinking, what parents here can we start to meet? We might not meet all of them, but can we meet some of them and start a connection with them, right? We're going to be there either way. It's not going to be extra time. One way or another, we're going to be there. The difference is what perspective, what mindset are we going to have when we go to this game? Are we going to have Jesus' mindset so that when we go, we are connecting with people and beginning to look? And what are we looking for as we meet people? Well, what we're looking for is what Jesus was looking for, and that's spiritual openness, right? But the question is, how are we going to know that? How are you going to know watching a soccer game if somebody is spiritually curious or open? That's pretty hard to do. Well, at one of these games, one of the first games we went to, Jackie met one of the moms. And Jackie's just, getting to know her, and then they're talking about what they did that weekend, that sort of thing. And Jackie said, well, we did this and this, and we went to church, and then we did this. And the woman said, the mom said, we just went to church for the first time in years. In fact, really probably one of the first times as a married couple. Now, do you think Jackie went, oh, that's nice, and went on to something else? No. She started asking her more about that and why they were going, what was motivating. And then a few minutes later, she comes over to me and you need to talk to her husband. You need to get to know him better and invite him to one of the groups you lead and that sort of thing. And I did. And to my amazement, he actually started coming to one of the discipleship groups I led and is still coming. So what Jackie did there was she just naturally but intentionally revealed a little bit about her journey as a person of faith. Right? She let that person know, I'm somebody that follows Jesus. She didn't try to, at that point, convince her of anything, invite her to anything. I mean, she could have. But basically, she was just trying to give her some information so that this woman, if she wanted to, could respond. And she did. Right? And so what she was doing is something that Jesus taught at a different place, where he said, Share of your life and see if that person is a person of peace, is what he called it. Someone who's open to you and open to God. Right? And it's very simple, but you find out something from people. Now, here's the thing. Just to be honest with you, a lot of people aren't that interested at any given time. They may not be cynical, but they may not be all that interested either. Right? But some people are. And in fact, it may surprise you who they are. Like Zacchaeus, surprising all of those people. Right? We had no idea that this is where they were at. Right? But by revealing a little bit of ourselves, they could respond and let us know where they were at spiritually. Right? But this is the thing. You've got to be thinking for this stuff to happen. Right? And I'll admit that sometimes I'm really good at thinking this way. It's on the front of my mind, and other times life gets in there and it goes way to the back. And now I'm just going to soccer games and everything else. I'm just, I'm in my neighborhood doing my thing, whatever. You really have to be conscious to think and live this way. Right? But without it, not much is going to happen. Without following Jesus' pattern on both of these areas, then we're kind of done. It has to be like that woman looking for this $100 bill. And you do have to use some wisdom, So if you struggle, for example, with, let's say, overindulging a little bit, you might not want to go, well, I'm going to go to the bar every weekend to, meet people for Jesus. That's probably not a great idea for you, right? There's plenty of healthy opportunities around you. Plenty, right? And that particular scenario might not be a challenge for you. That might be okay. But you need to use wisdom in this area. But one way or another, we've got to start thinking this way. So this morning, as we think about these two patterns, what would it look like for you to take a next step for one of these? To actually start living and applying one of these. For the first one, this first pattern of, having a heart for people. Let's put up that next slide. It may just be asking Jesus for his heart towards people who are different from you. And this sounds like a really simple thing to do. It's not, actually. At least for me, it wasn't. It was a process to get past this and say, God, I really want to welcome people into my life who are different. And he's probably going to need to start changing your heart and your mindset around this. Or maybe you're there, but you just are realizing, okay, I don't intentionally connect with people in the way we're talking about. I don't, have the mindset, the energy when I'm in these settings to do this. And so maybe it's just starting to do it. And all it is saying, hi, I don't think we've met yet. Our sons play on the same soccer team or the dance thing, or we're neighbors. We haven't talked in a while. It's just connecting. That's all it is, right? And then in the course of that, at some point, sharing a little bit, again, very simply, to let them know that you're a person of faith. And maybe that is your next step. Again, it is not super complicated, but it does require intentionality, right? This is the beginning of the process. And like Michael was sharing, this is a really important time in the life of our church. We've had a great summer, this summer heat initiative, growing together. And then in a few weeks, we're going to have this grand opening and invite people and say, man, we would love for you to be here. Here's the thing, though. If we haven't done the kind of stuff we're talking about this morning, then that's going to be very difficult to do, to invite somebody when we don't have relationship with anybody. How does that work? Well, what happens is you just start inviting random people, and it feels really awkward usually. At least that's my experience. But if you have started to welcome people into your life, started getting connected to people, and especially if you have some sense that there might be some openness there, and then you say, we've got this awesome church. We're doing a fun grand opening day. I'd love for you to come. There's a pretty good chance they're going to come. And of course, we're not just talking about the next few weeks, we're talking about all the weeks and months to come, that this becomes a lifestyle for us, right? And again, I want to say, we can do this. This is not about you being an expert. It's not about you having all the answers to all the questions. That's what so many Christians think. That's not what it's about. It's about you welcoming people into your life and connecting with them. It's really not complicated, but it does require the desire to do it, and thinking and living kind of like a missionary, like Jesus did. But I can tell you, it's actually really fun. It's really awesome as you start seeing people in your life opening up to God, and you get to be a part of it, right? You can do this. We can do this together. Let's pray. Jesus, I want to just, first of all, thank you and praise you that this is who you are. I'm so glad that you are like that versus the Pharisees who separated themselves. And Lord, we want to be like you. And so for any of us maybe that have kind of had some wrong thinking on this, I pray that you would begin to correct that and give us your heart and mind. And I pray that even this week we would just have some really neat connections with people as we step out and welcome them into our lives, Lord. And that you would surprise us. You would bring us the Zacchaeuses that are already around us and we just don't even know it, Lord. There's people that want to come home to you, and we want to be a part of helping them do that and to celebrate with you and the angels in heaven. We pray all of this in your name, Jesus. Amen.